It's September 16, 1994, in rural Zimbabwe just outside the town of Ruwa. For days, eerie lights have danced across the sky. At first, they were believed to be meteors, but that theory quickly falls apart when the strange lights begin making random and sudden changes in direction, moving in ways that seem to defy the laws of physics. Things are going to get even weirder though. A bizarre event that wasn't experienced by just one person or even a dozen, but an entire school. 62 school children and their teacher, to be precise. So just what happened that day? Get ready because we're about to reveal one of the most incredible UFO events in history. The town of Ruwa remains small even to this day, but in 1994 there was barely any structure to speak of. The region was surrounded by farmland, with one notable exception being the Ariel School, a private academy. Its student body of just over 200 was made up of primarily wealthy landowners from the surrounding area. On the day in question, the children were let out for recess as normal. The school's faculty had all been called into a meeting, leaving only one adult working the snack shop at the edge of the playground where children could purchase small treats. Seated inside the small shop, the person would remain oblivious to the events unfolding outside, at least until the panicked students came rushing to ask for help. Allison Kirkman was the mother of one of the students and a volunteer who helped staff the small snack shop, as well as do various other tasks around the school. Per Kirkman's account, 2 days after the incident, she heard a commotion outside, and one of the children ran into the shop. He was shouting that a UFO had just landed right outside the school grounds, and that there was, quote, a little man running around in a one-piece suit with a band around his head. Kirkman's own daughter would also witness the UFO, stating that she and other friends had seen a white-looking object land just 100 meters from them outside the school grounds. The location where the object had landed was sparsely covered in trees and large bushes, providing a degree of concealment to the object from the point of view of some of the children. Other children outside had become hysterical, but Kirkman believed it was a trick, likely meant to get her out of the snack shop so another group of children could rush in and steal some treats. The incident began to draw attention when concerned parents contacted the school over the weekend, as many children were still experiencing extreme anxiety or fear over the event. As the media picked up the story, the BBC sent their own correspondent to interview the children on the following Monday, 3 days after the incident. BBC war correspondent Tim Leach arrived at the school as a hard-boiled skeptic, believing the children were putting on an elaborate prank. However, in his own words, after investigating the incident and speaking with the children, Leach stated, quote, I could handle war zones, but I could not handle this. The children were asked to draw what they had seen, and here the story becomes confoundingly interesting. It's important to note that not a single member of the faculty believed the children were lying, with the dean of the school himself stating that while he did not believe the children had seen an alien spacecraft, he was convinced that they had seen, quote, something. When asked to draw what they saw, most of the children drew a very similar-looking craft, resembling a saucer with a more circular top. However, some of the children drew a completely different-looking craft altogether, leading to multiple versions of what the children saw. The creature or creatures, however, were largely very similar to one another from child to child, though with a notable exception of the small handful of children who drew the creatures as having long, flowing black hair. All children agreed, however, that the creatures had abnormally large eyes, and even children who had zero exposure to UFO media all drew a creature commonly reported around the world, a short, skinny figure with very large black eyes. It's the similarity of the creature that got the attention of people like Harvard's professor of psychiatry and Pulitzer Prize-winning author John Mack. He would visit the school just over a month and a half later and conduct interviews with the children one-on-one. Prior to this, Mack had been investigating alleged accounts of alien abduction and UFO sightings across America. Drawn to the similarity between reported events, despite massive geographic and even cultural and socioeconomic differences in the experiencers, the figures described by the majority of children closely described figures reported by abductees and UFO witnesses that Mack had investigated in the United States, including the typical large black eyes and skinny bodies, commonly known as grays. There has never been a good explanation as to how some of the children in rural Zimbabwe, with no exposure to Western media, had come to describe almost the exact same type of creature. Per Mack's interview, some of the children reported receiving a telepathic message from the beings. Interestingly, all of the alleged messages had the exact same theme. Humanity was destroying its own planet through pollution and irresponsible use of technology. The beings apparently implored the children to be good environmental stewards, with one child who did not claim to have a telepathic experience stating instead that during the weekend after the event, she was troubled by dreams and thoughts of an overpolluted planet. If these were in fact aliens, and they had indeed come to spread environmental awareness, one wonders why they didn't bother doing so to the heads of the world's major oil and coal corporations. Mack would be seriously harassed by many staff at Harvard for his involvement in the Ariel school incident, as well as his investigation into the UFO phenomenon on the whole. Like many other academics before them, Mack's peers could not offer plausible explanations for the events he documented, and merely demanded the entire thing was a hoax, or the equally incredulous belief that everyone involved was lying or misidentifying. Some skeptics claim that the entire event was an elaborate prank, though there has never been any proof offered to that extent. No evidence of pranking was ever discovered, nor of the elaborate set pieces required to pull off such a prank and then disappear within 15 minutes while in full sight of the children. With these explanations, though, we are reminded of the difference between skepticism and denialism. Skepticism is based on evidence, while denialism is based on faith. In this case, faith that a UFO landing was impossible, and therefore, without any evidence whatsoever and a great deal in opposition, a prank was the likely culprit. Others have argued that the children saw puppets used to teach kids about AIDS, or that they misidentified a dust devil. Yet again, the preposterousness of either suggestion is lost on those who presented it. Then there's the outbreak of UFO sightings in the days prior, both in Zimbabwe and in neighboring countries. For 2 nights, Zimbabwean witnesses reported seeing strange lights and objects traveling across the sky. On one of the nights, it's known that a Soviet booster was re-entering the atmosphere and breaking up over Africa, resulting in a spectacular light show that would have been visible to many. However, this explanation runs in opposition to the reports of the observed objects changing directions as they traveled through the sky. Witnesses across the other South African nations all reported seeing strange lights and objects in the sky prior to the Ariel event, with one witness reporting an object was hovering directly over her home, though she was unsure of the exact date, simply that it was around the time of the Ariel event. So, why the difference in the children's accounts if they all saw the same thing? Because if there's one point that's hard to reconcile for UFO believers, it's how dramatically different some of the children recalled the event. First, it's important to remember that the oldest witnesses were in 7th grade, although in 2023 a former schoolteacher did come forward to confirm that she too had seen a silverish object on the day. Fearful for her career, she'd remained silent about it for 3 decades. The young age of many of the students could go a long way for accounting in the difference between accounts, but this also is not an excuse to simply throw away their testimony, because the similarities are entirely too strong to easily dismiss. Then there's the effect of stress on both perception and memory. It's well established that stress, fear, and especially shock of the unexpected can have a severe impact on how one perceives and remembers an event. Those willing to toss out the Ariel event simply due to the disparity in the children's accounts of it would also be tossing out other accounts of less controversial events, such as the sinking of the Titanic. Survivors interviewed shortly after the sinking gave contradictory tellings of the sinking itself, with some stating that the bow of the ship had sunk first and others confident it had been the stern. Even the way in which it sank was different from one witness to another, yet nobody disputes that A, the Titanic existed, and that B, it sank. Likewise, the children all agreed on the presence of an object, and many of them on the presence of at least one individual. 3 decades later, 3 of the witnesses continued to stick to their story and remained confident that they indeed saw a UFO land that day, along with a being who exited the craft. And they're not the only witnesses of a mass UFO sighting. In 1966, students and staff in Australia all reported seeing a cigar-shaped UFO land near their school. Later, parents and school faculty would recall the presence of military and government officials who conducted interviews with the witnesses, and according to some, even threatened them to remain quiet. There's also one important note to consider pertaining to the UFO phenomenon and what happened at Ariel and similar events around the world. Time and again, we have seen reports of the same UFO event by multiple witnesses with significant variations. In at least one case in France, a family photographed a UFO over their vehicle and were shocked to discover that when the pictures were later developed, what they had photographed did not look at all like what they remembered. This has prompted some to begin to consider that the UFO phenomenon may not be entirely physical, but rather have a psychological component to it. It may be that whatever is behind the phenomenon is either purposefully or accidentally affecting our ability to perceive it. Perhaps it's a byproduct of close proximity to the exotic technology required to power physics-defying craft, or perhaps the decades-old proposition that UFOs are the craft of extraterrestrial visitors is completely and bafflingly wrong. The truth about the UFO phenomenon may be altogether far stranger than we're prepared to accept, or capable of thinking at our current level of evolutionary and technological development. Much like the discovery of the atom and the quantum world beyond it, the UFO phenomenon may be but the visible tip of an iceberg that we have the same lack of ability to comprehend as even the brightest minds in the world when quantum physics was first being mused upon. A caveman, after all, could not possibly understand what an airplane was even if they saw one in flight. Now go watch U.S. Special Forces Confession, I Recovered Crashed UFOs, or click this other video instead.